So, when Britain left the European Union, the plan for, at least according to people like me, which is right-wing libertarian conservatives, was that we would see a great bonfire of European regulations. We would get rid of the Working Time Directive. We would tear up GDPR. We would make sure we did the absolute opposite of the AI Act and the Digital Markets Act. That hasn't quite happened, unfortunately. This isn't necessarily because Brexit was in itself a mistake. It was more a consequence of the particular problems in British politics. Because after all, you may know that the Conservative Party wasn't united behind Brexit. It was something that was rather forced on us by the public. We do still have a slightly better business environment. You're able to create new products, innovate a little bit more. We have a sandbox system with the Financial Conduct Authority, which means you can create products which otherwise would be illegal in the European Union and prove that they're safe through real-world evidence. That is a brilliant opportunity for innovation and for consumers, and it enables entrepreneurs, startup founders to grow businesses. The problem is going from small businesses to big businesses. And I think Britain, while at the technological frontier in many areas, has never been particularly good at commercializing the amazing ideas that are invented in this country. So Tim Berners-Lee essentially invented the internet, but we don't have a British Google. There isn't a European Google either, but there definitely isn't a British Google or a British Microsoft. Interestingly, the magnetically levitated trains that you see in China and Japan, which are the pride of these East Asian transport networks, that technology was invented in Britain in the 1950s or 60s, but we never commercialized it because our energy grid, at that point running on coal, was unable to provide the electricity required to do magnetically levitated trains. 20 years later, we move our energy grid onto gas and nuclear, and we could have done it, but we missed that opportunity at the time. And that tells you a much bigger story about the problems of the British economy and how they can be fixed than whether we're in or outside the European Union. A really interesting problem in Britain is planning and infrastructure and energy. So we have amazing ideas. We have some of the best tech companies in the world, at least at the sort of research and early development stage, with companies like Arm and DeepMind, which have benefited hugely from American investment. But the next stage is how we turn those companies into serious new products, adopt them into the economy. We have a tax system which works against investment and productivity. So I don't know how much you know about the British business rate system, but if you're a factory owner and you want to upgrade the machinery in your factory to have more, a greater technology, greater use of AI, improve your factory, your tax bill goes up because the commercial value of your building increases, so therefore the government wants more money off it. So that's a great incentive not to improve your technology, and instead, if you want to increase your output, you'll just juice it with, usually cheaper labour and low-quality immigration. That is not a way to innovate. That is not a way to turn technological ideas into a seriously dynamic economy. We have an amazingly incoherent and contradictory approach to technological innovation and then how that hits regulation on the ground. So obviously, everyone's talking about data centers. We've heard here about how we need more data centers to provide the data for our tech sector. Industrial energy in Britain is the most expensive in the developed world. Data centers need a lot of energy. So that's a great reason not to invest, despite all the tax breaks and all the incentives you might otherwise give for a data center. But even more ridiculously, recently a data center planning application was refused because it might spoil the view of a motorway. And this was a motorway, the M25, the orbital motorway around London, and it was a data centre, but local campaigners said they didn't want a data centre being built there because it was ugly. And this is something that would be essential to fueling tech companies in Britain for the next generation. So these are the sorts of things which are holding Britain back. It's not necessarily about business regulation. It's about actually decades of slightly dysfunctional, incoherent policy. Another area which I've done a lot of work on recently is the matter of digital competition. And Britain and Europe are in an interesting place in digital competition. You have the Digital Markets Act, and we have a bill called the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Bill. This bill has been kicking around British politics for many years. It was motivated by the idea that American big tech companies are too big, too powerful, anti-competitive. Facebook and Google have an unassailable duopoly when it comes to search advertising, and therefore we need to do something on antitrust to break them up. The report that said that was published in 2019. Now anyone that looks at the online search ad will realize that there is no such duopoly anymore. Thanks to the rise of Amazon and e-commerce, there is no longer a duopoly. It might be a triopoly, and it will soon be a much greater, broader market because the internet economy is always diversifying because consumers want more interesting products, and consumer habits change very, very quickly. Nevertheless, we're regulating accordingly. And the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Markets Bill, is quite similar but quite different to the European one. And the danger is that if you're an investor looking at developing new tech products in the UK, or Europe actually, and you'll think on the margin, London's quite a good place, there's really intelligent people, but I can't really trust that regulator, so I'm just going to stay in the United States. It's not about Britain or Europe competing with each other. Realistically, it's about Europe and Britain working out how they can get money from the US, because the US is just speeding ahead when it comes to technological development and innovation. One thing I'm really worried about the Digital Markets Bill is it provides the Competition and Markets Authority with a huge amount of power, which is essentially political power, which I think is inappropriate for a regulator. Regulators are there to enforce the laws which are passed by Parliament, who are elected. They are legislators. Instead, the Competition and Markets Authority wants the power to essentially create new competition law and create it in a very opaque and unpredictable way. This contrasts to the European Union's Digital Markets Act. I think the Digital Markets Act is also very bad, but the main strength it has is while it's very prescriptive and despite its very prescriptive, very onerous, loads of line by line by line by line requirements that every company has to abide by. So that's obviously rubbish, but at least you know what those requirements are. In the British bill, we are apparently doing something more flexible, and flexibility should make you run a mile, because flexibility means the regulator wants to do whatever it wants and it's not going to tell you what it wants to do. And instead it might well fine a company 10% of its global turnover if it falls foul of these regulations that you don't know what they're going to look like. Now, to me, that is a terrifying prospect for innovation in Britain, and it's something that must be resisted. But as we all know, big tech is very unpopular. Big tech's an easy enemy. So if you want to attack big tech by saying, these American companies are extracting rents and money and killing innovation in Europe, it's an easy enemy. I'll close by saying we have a general election coming up. We may well see a Labour Party victory. It will be the first time Labour will be in government in Britain since 2010. The Conservative Party's not had a great track record in innovation, but as a Conservative member myself and someone that's worked in Conservative politics, I plead that we are not terrible. And that Labour will be far, far worse. We will see a return to aggressive regulation in the labour market. They might not increase taxes because they know that's politically impossible, but we'll see it'll be impossible to fire people. We'll see greater DEI and ESG in the workforce, and it will really just put more friction in the gears and grind against innovation. So the general election is probably going to happen in November. Let's see what happens until then. Maybe my fellow colleagues in British Conservative Party will work out how to put up a fight, but let's see in the meantime, and let's hope that we don't lose all of our entrepreneurs to the United States. Thank you very much.